Welcome back to the Gyrl Podcast. I'm Kyra. All right, I am excited to welcome Alexis to the podcast. Welcome.
Hi, Kyra. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So I am really excited to have this conversation with you today because we know it's the time of the year where everybody has goals. They're trying to form new habits. We all want to be productive, but we want to be disciplined and not let distractions overtake us in that first month. So I'm excited that you're here to help us out. So let's get started. Why don't we have you tell everyone listening or watching who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks. So I'm Alexis Haselberger. I am a time management, productivity, and leadership coach. And what that means is I work with people to figure out how to use their time in a way that supports their goals and their values so that they can do more of what they want and less of what they don't.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I absolutely love that because I think that is a goal that we all have. Like, no matter, it's not like a yearly thing. It's like just during the year. I'm always saying I want to do more of the things I want to do and less of the things that I don't want to do. But it's the figuring out how to do that, right?
Right. And that it's going to be different for everyone, right? I think, sometimes I hate the term productivity coach because it makes you think of like all of those productivity bros out there who are like, faster, more, get up at 5 a.m., let's do all the things. And like, that is not at all what my goal is, right?
Yes. And I'm glad you said that because that is really key. So it's like there are different routines for different people. Like getting up early in the morning might work for some, but starting late might work for some and staying up late, so it's just based on who you are.
Right.
So let's talk about your typical clients. So what does a typical client look like and what is the thing that they struggle with the most?
Yeah. So my typical clients tend to be people who are like mid-level career. I work with like a lot of professionals. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of solopreneurs, but also a lot of doctors, lawyers, tech executives, like those types of folks who are like, they're mid-career, they have like, or maybe even late career, they have certainly gained success, but oftentimes really at the expense of their stress, their health, their relationships. Like, to other people, they might look like, hey, that person has it all together. They get so much done. But on the inside, they're like, yeah, but it's because I work every night until 1 a.m. and like I haven't exercised in a really long time and like I'm not eating healthily or whatever those things. So they tend to be people who are just like, hey, I've gotten successful through hard work and now I want to remain successful, but I want it to not be so hard.
Right. You want it not to be like the thing that encompasses your life is that you just work all the time.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And, it's interesting, right? We said all people are different. Some people actually come to me. I remember there's a lawyer who came to me and she said, look, I work 80-hour weeks. And I like it. I like the amount of time I'm working. But what I want to do is be more efficient within those hours. Okay, great. We can help you do that. Right.
I like that. I'm glad that you gave us a second example because, there are people who are happy doing 80-hour weeks.
Right. And it's not me.
More power to you.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said. It's like, if your goal is that like you want to find more time to binge watch Netflix, I want to help you with that goal. Right. Like, I don't care what your goals are. But when it comes to the second part of your question, which was, what do people typically struggle with? I think there are a number of things that most people are struggling with, no matter where they fall in kind of those spectrums. And I think number one is like thinking you can do it all, thinking there's some like magic Tetris formula that's going to make it so that like every single thing that you want to do, think you should do, think you have to do, et cetera, is going to actually fit into your life. Right. I think that's a huge mental hurdle. And then there's just a lot of practical things people are struggling with, like email overload, meeting overload, how to prioritize, procrastination. And I think saying no is a really big one too.
I agree with you. I think people have a really hard time saying no because especially, when you're in the corporate world, it's like if you say no, you're not a team player.
Right.
I say no, then they're going to look, I'm not going to be seen as a team player. And then when people are like entrepreneurs, oftentimes it's like, you don't want to say no because it's like, oh, I need that business.
Right.
So I don't want to miss out on something. So there are just so many different examples of where people might be struggling.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like the setting of like determining what are your boundaries and
Hmm.
then like how do you say no without feeling like a jerk, right? Because there are ways to say no to something at work that isn't like, hey, no, I'm not doing that, right? Like there are
Exactly.
ways that we can say that we can say, hey, like, my plate is really full right now. I'm happy to take that on, but we'll need to think about how we prioritize these other things, right? Like
Hmm.
it's a
Hmm.
much gentler way, but you're still saying no. You're saying like, I can do this or
Exactly.
that, not both, right?
Exactly. And yeah, I love that. And I do think it's also too, because for myself, like being a workingpreneur, I
Yeah.
mean, it is the thing of being able to prioritize like what's important in the business. Because obviously I have a job. So I have to work, I have to do the work on the job, right? But then it was when I would after I would close door one and go to door two, and thinking, oh my God, I gotta do all these things, I gotta do all these things. And then eventually I got to a place where I was like, no, I need to figure out like what are the most important things for the business and do those things.
Right.
And then I need to say no to like, no, I don't have to post on social media every day. Like I don't.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it took me a really long time before I got to the point of being like, I don't have to, it's okay. Like, because I would always feel like I'm letting myself down. I got to do it because everybody else is doing it. But now I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to post when it makes sense for me and for my business. And I'm not going to like give myself get stressed out about it, give myself anxiety over trying to like spend the whole weekend like putting together content because that's what will happen. Like I start on Saturday and then I'd have no time like actually to relax because I spent all the weekend like working on like content.
Right. Right. And especially, I mean, I'm right there with you with the social media, right? It's like, and
Mhm.
there's no guarantee that's going to move the needle anyway, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And yeah, because we're in the world of like, you've got to pay to play. So,
Yep.
so it's always
Yep.
making those decisions. Okay. So let's talk about some things that, like you mentioned earlier, about the some people who are pushing you to, gotta hustle harder, grind harder, get up. Um, and a lot of those things could be seen as like myths. What are some common like myths, beliefs that you think people have, but really they're just like myths as it relates to being productive?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to harken back to something I said that was like one of people's biggest issues that they show up with. And it is
Mhm.
just this idea that productivity is about doing more things, like doing
Mhm.
all the things, making sure that there's never a moment of downtime and that like,
Yes.
it's kind of, the whole like 5 hour miracle or 5 a.m. miracle morning situation, just like as long as you get up 3 hours before everyone else and like, track all of your time 100% of the time that
Mhm.
like you're doing it wrong, right? And that like
Right.
that's
Yeah.
what productivity means. I think that's a huge one. I think that there's also a really big myth that something that works for me will definitely work for you, right?
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
just think that so and I think this gets a lot of people into a really, like a feeling kind of disempowered because it's like you
Mhm.
read I don't know, getting things done or deep work or whatever and like you try to implement it. You're like, obviously this is going to work. Like this is sold a million
Mhm.
copies and like people love it and whatever and like why can't I make it work? And it might not work for you because like the person who wrote that, they wrote it for their own brain, for their own
Exactly.
circumstances, for their
Mhm.
own life. And so you can pull nuggets from all these things,
Mhm.
but it's not a failure if you can't implement exactly what worked for somebody else.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
I think and that is so true because, you see people, you know, documenting their morning and I get up, like I do get up early, but that's because it works for Kyra. Like
Yeah.
I like to be up early because I just feel like, okay, I get to jump on the day.
Yeah.
But you know, that, like you said, it's not for everybody. But then, when people are like trying to push that on you, like, oh, well, if you're not up, like, if you don't get up at 5:40, I mean, you're missing out on the day. Like, you're not getting, you're not starting with the rest of us. You can't be working harder than me because you're not up. And it's really, like you said, about prioritization. So
Right.
a lot of times people who are up early, well, you're up early, you've got a to-do list that's so long and it's not really prioritized. You're just doing a lot of things that you said the key words. People mistake like, productivity, same way as I see busy, which is doing a lot. Like I've got
Yes.
so much going on that I'm doing all these things and I'm sitting in all these meetings and I'm so important, but yet you're not really like getting anything done.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Because I think it's like saying, "Oh, I'm so busy," or like, "I only slept 5 hours last night." That is not a flex. Like, that means there is something wrong. Like,
Yeah.
something wrong is happening. Like,
Yeah, that is definitely not the place right there.
right. Yeah.
Now, if
Uh,
you only slept 5 hours because you were up binge watching something on TV, I mean, come on, okay.
yeah,
Well,
yeah. And yeah, you're exactly right. It's like, I wish I were a type of person who could wake up really early in the morning. Like the
Mhm.
world is built for morning people. Like that would certainly make my life easier. And I have two teenagers. Like I have spent many years of my life waking up early so that I could get them off to
Yes.
school and all. Like I have done it. But like
Yes.
as soon as my kids started getting themselves to school, I was like, oh, thank God I can go back to like what is a more normal sleep cycle for me.
Right. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
waking up has been the hardest part of my day since I was 5 years old.
I like that because I do feel like, personally for myself, even though like right now when I'm working, I get up at 5:40 because I have to work out before work because I don't trust myself after work.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but in a real life, like perfect world, waking up at like 7:30
Mhm.
would be ideal for me.
Right. Right.
And like 7:30, I feel like, oh, I've gotten enough rest. I mean, I got to stay up and do what I want to do last night. I still got to sleep. And now at 7:30, I can roll into the day.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I think that you bring up a really good point, and that we were kind of just talking about is like we can't always do the thing that would be ideal because of other life circumstances, right? Like
Exactly. Yes.
we don't have, and I think there is something to be said about like a lot of the people who have written a lot of these productivity books that we try to, but
Mhm.
are men, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
who may not have, I mean, I don't want to completely genderize things, but like, studies do show that more of like the caregiving responsibilities and things like
Hmm.
that typically do fall to women, more the mental load does, et cetera. And so
Right. Right.
there are definitely going to be uh, situations in which like your circumstances just don't allow you to do what would be
Exactly.
like ideal, right?
Exactly. No, I think that I agree with you. I think that's true. I don't have children. I don't have physical human children, but I have fur baby.
Yep.
And the fur baby is like, mom gets up, at first and takes
Yep.
them out because dad is still sleeping.
Yep. Yep. And like
And
some people have like elder care responsibilities. And,
exactly. Yeah.
like people have got all sorts of things going. I mean, and that
Exactly.
isn't, I'm not here to say that like men are not doing the work, right? They are. But I'm
Yeah.
just going to say for everybody's circumstance, we
Mhm.
all have different circumstances. And
Yes.
like we can't necessarily say, oh, this worked for you. And like it's somehow
Yeah.
just flop and fit nice like a puzzle piece into my life. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, we were just talking about our lives. I was
Yeah.
just saying how I live with a person who doesn't
Right.
get up until 10 o'clock every day. I'm just saying,
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like
kudos to him.
it's like I live with a person who spends 20 hours a week watching football and cannot be like swayed from that, right? Like,
I mean, I am there with him.
but we
I
all have our
am,
priorities,
yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah.
I am the person in my house that can watch sports nonstop. My husband's always like, I mean, you haven't had enough of that yet? I'm like, no.
Yeah. You're like, never. How could I?
Right. Okay. So, question for you:
Yeah.
how do you define productivity?
Yeah. This is like, I love this question. For me, the definition of productivity is doing what I intended to do. And so for me, this means that like it's productive if I made a plan for work stuff and I did that stuff. It's also productive if my plan was to go sit in the backyard in the hammock and read for a few hours or have a beer and listen to some music or whatever. Like if that was my intention, then that is productive. And so that's what it is for me. It's not about like the number of things you accomplish or whatever. It's just how closely do my intentions match my actions?
That is fantastic. And I just love that because a lot of times you'll hear people, on the weekends, well, they'll say something like, well, I just ended up like lounging around the house and like just watching some movies. Okay. Like Is that what
Right.
you intended? Is that what you were planning to do? And that's how I see it, because a lot of times there are weekends where I just intend to like, no, this weekend I'm going to watch sports. I'm going to catch up on, I'm going to read a book. I'm going to do this thing. And that's all I'm going to do. It's not going
Yeah.
to be, I'm not going to open my computer.
Yeah.
And I don't feel bad about it at all.
Right. Because of that and I think that's like such a key, right? Is that like like what we didn't change, but how we think about it does, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's like if you do the things that you're intending to do, you
Mhm.
feel good about that. You've completed a cycle, right?
Yeah.
And like sometimes I have clients who they just really struggle with downtime for those reasons, right? And I think like
Mhm.
culturally, right, we're very focused on productivity and busy and all of
Right.
that. And
Yes.
so I will often sometimes tell them just add a calendar appointment from like Friday at 5 p.m. to Sunday at 10 p.m. that says, do whatever I want. And then you won't feel guilty that you're not like doing that house project or like catching
Mhm.
up on email or whatever, because your intention was to do whatever you wanted.
I like that. And does that work for them? Has it worked for them?
It actually does. It's one of those like silly little tricks where,
Mhm.
sometimes I might start with being like, just do it for 8 hours, right? Just put it on Sunday from like, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Just say do whatever you want. Like so
Mhm.
people need to see like, oh yeah, that actually did help free me up.
Mhm.
And then sometimes, they don't even need that appointment anymore once they kind of jump over that mental hoop. But
Right.
I think it really has, sometimes we just have these little mental tricks we need to do to get
Yeah.
ourselves over a hump. And it actually works really well for a lot of people.
I like that because it definitely is very much a mindset shift. Um, and like you said, it's something that is seemingly very small,
Yeah.
but I think very powerful, because I mean, I do that in my calendar. Well, this is one thing I do like about Microsoft, is that Microsoft recommends focus time. So,
Mhm.
throughout the day, and it will say, so I was like, oh, yes, Microsoft, I will take this focus time. And so it started to help to like break up the calendar. So, I mean, I have a lot of meetings during the day and this focus time, but I keep that focus time because I'm like,
Yeah.
no, like I need time on Monday mornings. Like, I don't want to be in anybody's meeting before 1 o'clock on Monday.
Right.
And on Fridays, I don't want to be in anybody's meetings.
Yep. Me too. Me too.
I need Fridays to just like catch up, to work quietly at my desk. And I always tell my team, like, look, I will never put you in a meeting on Friday unless it's an emergency. But even then, I will attempt to huddle you in
Yeah.
Slack first and
Yeah.
not put a Zoom on the calendar so we have to look at each other.
Yeah. Yes. I bet people like you, that's for sure.
Yes, I'm all about like, I don't know, it's just something so small about like meetings, and like streamlining and optimizing like people's time and being good stewards of people's time. Because it's just like, just because you want to meet about something, it doesn't mean like, because that's the first thing people are like, oh, I'll be glad to jump on in a quick call with you. No, I don't want a quick call.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I one of my most popular workshops for corporate, like for corporate environments that I do is
Mhm.
making meetings better. And it involves a meeting audit and a whole lot of things that of
Yes.
like basically flipping the paradigm so that the first thought isn't let's have a meeting, that's the last resort, right?
Mhm.
Like when we've already thought through things by ourselves, when we've already done the work that needs to be done without anybody else's opinion, when we've
Mhm.
already like when we really do need a real time discussion on something.
Yes.
But I think you're right. So many times it's just like there's some sort of issue or topic. Let's have a meeting.
Yes. Like, let's meet about it. No, let's not.
Yes, you and I are aligned
I
there.
I'm real I promise you're really good. And I think, like, I didn't really notice it until, like, maybe, like, 2 jobs ago that I had, and I got tasked with a corporate project for meeting optimization. And so then I had to, like, go around sort of doing, like, an audit of
Yeah,
different groups and meetings and how often people were meeting, and even, like, sitting in on meetings and seeing how, like, people were just wasting time because,
yeah,
like, the first 10 minutes of the meeting are just people talking to each other.
yeah,
And then the meeting starts and there's not really an agenda. There's the person saying, well, I mean, I thought we could get together and, just like, talk about this because there was an email. And then you've got everybody shuffling to try to find the email. Let me get the email because I don't have it in front of me.
Right.
And then before you know it, it's like already 25 after. And you're thinking, oh my God, this is 25 minutes. I'll never get back of my life.
Right. Right. It was wasted, right?
Yes.
Like just completely wasted. Yes.
And it's like you said, there has to be a shift in the mindset because so I went through this whole process, right? Came up with like tools to help people run meetings better, to prep for meetings, to do the closing, to send out the action items, all that stuff. And then we even had like little things that we made to put inside of the meeting rooms that help people, so there was always a person in there that you would put one person in charge of like keeping the meeting on track.
Yes. Meeting rules. Yes.
Yes.
Thank
And
you.
so, and so we probably did that for like, I mean, it lasted like a month. Oh, and then I asked for like no meeting Wednesdays, but I got shot down and it was like, well, we'll do half day. Like we'll do afternoon. I was like, okay, we'll take it. But before long, all those things were just blurred. The lines were blurred. We've got to meet. We have to meet. I know it's Wednesday, but we have to meet. It's an emergency. I'm like, is somebody down?
Yeah. It's so interesting. I'm a big believer of having a meeting day as well. And what I've tried every day of the week. And what I found is that Monday is actually the best day for no meetings because people are not like, one, you get to start the week like just fully being productive, et cetera.
Yes.
But two, the longer you go in the week, the more likely you are to make exceptions because, we get towards the end of the week and we're like, we have to meet this week, right? But on Monday, it's not an emergency yet. And so I found that like, that's actually, I mean, take what you can, right? Like if they're willing to do anything, take what you can. But that's what I found after a lot of people want to do Fridays. And I'm like, Friday is the worst day because people are all trying to get things done by the end of the week, right?
Yeah. But I do appreciate a no meetings Monday too. Like, I probably have like 2 meetings on Mondays. And those are like standing meetings. But other than that, nope, I keep that calendar locked tight because I'm like, nope, no, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Like start the day, start with work, start with getting stuff done.
Right. Yeah. Like, my goodness, didn't you leave a list on Friday that you want to start on?
Exactly.
I mean, like, I did.
Yeah.
Okay. So you did give us a tip before about, with the calendar invite, if someone is struggling with actually like stepping away, taking time for themselves. What are some other tips that the audience might use to improve how they manage their time and how they feel about it?
Yes. So I think my number one tip, and this is going to sound so basic, but you would be very surprised how many people are not doing this, is to use a task system and write everything down in it. Like, I don't care what it is, but use something and have it be one place, right? So that we can prioritize exactly as we were talking about before, because I think so many people that I work with, it's like, it's not that they're never writing anything down, right? That's not true. But it's that email is a to-do list and Slack is a to-do list and they've got a paper notebook and there are Post-it notes all over their desk. And like, it's just all of these things. And it's very difficult to prioritize when your brain is ping-ponging between all of these different locations, right? And so I think that like whatever works for you. But the thing that I recommend most frequently is an app called TickTick, not TikTok. That is not for our productivity. It's for our fun. But TickTick. And I really like this one because it's super easy to use and the free version is really good.
Okay.
And so I would start like, or just literally put it in a document if you want to start there, but just start getting stuff out of your head because we waste so much energy remembering the things to do and always feeling like there's this anxiety ball at the back of our head, right? That's like, well, I know I'm missing something, but I just don't know what it is or like when it's going to come back to bite me. And like that causes a lot of stress.
Or you wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, oh, that thing. And
Or you have trouble falling asleep because you're thinking about all of those things. So just like write it down. Like that's the very first thing I would say.
And how is tick spelled? For
TICK.
All right, tick. We like it.
But honestly, like whatever app you're using, it'll work. I've run entire startups off of a shared spreadsheet, right? It's like as long as whatever you're using has a
Mhm.
place for the task name, some place to write what your next steps are, a date that you can sort by, and
Mhm.
some sort of commenting field so that you can say what you did and when, like that's
Mhm.
all we need, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So anything you're using will likely work. And then the other big thing, and it sounds like you already do this, but maybe your listeners don't, is just every day make sure that before you stop working, you have a realistic plan for the next day.
Mhm.
Like, and when I say realistic, I mean realistic. I mean, not you have a list of 50 things you're going to try to get to, that you know in your heart of hearts you're not going to get to.
Yeah.
I mean that you've like looked at your task system, you've looked
Mhm.
at your list, or maybe if you don't have that, you've just thought about it and you've looked at your calendar and you've thought about how much time do I actually have tomorrow, right?
Mhm.
So, if you have 5 meetings, you're probably not going to get much done other than getting through your email and your Slack, right? So,
Right.
really thinking about how much time do you have and then what actually fits in that time. Because so often we do I'll give you an example. What is going to feel better, right? If you have time to do 5 things tomorrow, is it going to feel better to put the right 5 things on your list and do them, or to put 25 things on your list and do 5 of them, right?
Right. Yeah.
In the end, you've done 5 things.
Yeah.
But the first scenario, not only have you done the right things, but
Mhm.
also you've done the things you intended to, so you feel good about it. And
Yes.
in the latter case, even if you did the same right 5 things, you still feel terrible because you didn't get to
Because
do the
you
20
got
things.
the other 20 things on the Oh my God. Yes. Yes. Because you've got the other 20 things. And that happens all the time. I see people do that all the time where they've got like these long lists of like things. And I used to do it. Like
Sure,
there was
me
a
too. I
time in
used
my
to do
life.
that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a time where I used to like write everything. But then I just decided like, no, I can't do that to myself. I need to pick like the 5 most important things that I must do tomorrow.
Yes,
And
exactly.
then those are the things. And then, of course, I am one of those people. Now, of course, we know it when you work anywhere, there are going to be some surprises.
Of course.
So,
Yeah.
whenever there's a surprise, I write that down on my list
Yeah.
just to cross it off.
I agree. And I think you bring up a really valid point, which is we also need to leave buffer in our schedule because
Mhm.
surprises always come up or things
Yes.
always take longer than we think they're going to take. And so if we
Yeah.
don't have any kind of buffer in there to allow for that,
Mhm.
then we find ourselves in this kind of vicious cycle where it's like we moved things to tomorrow and then now tomorrow's list is 3 times as big and then we can't get
Yes.
through it. So it all moves to the next day. And then
And
we feel like, why did I start doing this in the first place?
right. Yes. And then
Yeah.
then you shut down and you just don't do a list and you come in and you're just working from like
You're just
crazy
like,
worlds of like, I gotta do this. You're working from whatever someone comes over and tells you is a priority.
right. Yeah. I feel exactly like
Yeah.
I feel like it is the difference between being reactive and being proactive.
Ding ding.
And
Yes.
like when you're doing whatever comes, like I always call it like letting the day happen to you, right? Where
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
like maybe you started out with a list, but instead you started with email, you just started reacting to things. People brought something to you, there's a squeaky wheel, you did that thing, and then you get to the end of the day and you're like, I didn't cross a
Mhm.
single thing off my list,
Yes.
but I
Yes.
wasn't screwing around. Like I've
Yeah.
been working all day,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah. And
Yeah.
then that brings me to kind of what I will say is my last big tip for
Mhm.
folks, which is remove any notifications that you reasonably can, right? Like
Mhm.
you don't need first we'll start with the category of like social media and gaming. Turn those notifications off. No one needs to know that somebody liked their Instagram post or like that Candy Crush is calling your name or whatever, right? Like just turn those off. Turn off email notifications.
Mhm.
Nobody uses email in an emergency, right? So
Right.
as long as you're batch processing, as long as you're like in your inbox a few times a day at least, like processing what's there, you don't need to know about an email that's coming right that
Mhm.
second.
Mhm.
And then also like depending on your work environment and the needs, like Slack can often also be silenced if you're at least in there every hour or so checking things and
Mhm.
making sure. But what the reason that I think this is so important is that studies show that every time we get interrupted or distracted, which, you know, is how
Mhm.
right? Like studies show it's every 11 minutes, but that study is like 10 years old. So I would say it's probably way more than
Yeah.
that now,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And then also that every time we get interrupted or distracted, it takes us approximately 23 minutes on average to refocus on what we were doing. And
Mhm.
so most people lose about a third of the workday just in this kind of distraction and refocusing process. And if we can remove even some of those distractions, we are going to have so much more time to actually do the work.
I love that. That is really true.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
know
you,
I know people don't like to hear that, especially about the notifications, because it always feels like people feel like they're going to miss something.
yeah.
But
But what I tell them is they're already missing things,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
the
And
notification isn't making it better.
and like you said, a lot of things that come with notifications, those are things to be reactive to.
Right, right. I call like Slack and email, that is like other people's priorities, right? Sometimes they align with my priorities. And I
Right.
certainly like, I mean, I'm an inbox zero person. Like I certainly like don't ignore any of that. But
Mhm.
also I don't need to like, I don't need to know about it the second it comes because I don't need it to hijack my own priorities.
Exactly. Because
Right.
yes, that's exactly what it does. Comes
Yeah.
over, and especially people, because I moved. I mean, like with Outlook, and it pops up in the right hand corner of the screen, and I'm like, no, thank you. Let's turn that off. And
Right.
sometimes I just close out of it, and
Oh,
then yeah,
great.
and
Even
then
better.
and then I go back to it like a couple hours later when I'm like taking a break. Like, oh, I'm finished doing what I was working on. Now I can go do this. I'll check these in between.
Exactly.
But yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So I think we know the answer to this, but definitely want to hear you. Do you think it's harder to manage our time today than it was 10 years, even 20 years ago?
I think it is. Yeah. I mean, I think that just, the way that I think about it is this, like when my parents were in the working world, right? And even
Mhm,
in the early years of my working career, right?
mhm.
I could not take work home. It was physically impossible, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
I had a desktop. My desktop lived at the office.
Yeah.
I didn't have a smartphone, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there was no way and like for my parents, like maybe they didn't even have computers, right? So it's like there was
Mhm,
literally no way for them to take work home. And it was very
mhm.
difficult for other people to kind of take work home, right?
Right.
And I think that now, and especially after, like, I think there are a lot of amazing things about the ability to work from home and that has done more
Mhm.
good than harm, right?
Yes.
I also think that it has come with a really big boundary struggle for people
Mhm,
because we can answer work emails from
mhm,
bed on Saturday morning, we do. And
mhm.
most of us don't want to do that, right? But
Right.
it
Yeah.
feels like because it's possible, we should be always on. And it requires a resetting of boundaries, and resetting boundaries isn't comfortable to do, right? It's not,
Mhm.
it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is, but I definitely will encourage people to do that because that was one of the things for me when I came home. I've been working at home since 2020, and then I changed jobs in between the pandemic.
Yeah.
And one thing is like now I don't nope, I'm not answering. I mean, there's a boundary of like when I log off in the evening, that's
Yep.
it. Like I'm not looking at Slack. I'm not checking email. I don't even have like the only way I can look at my emails if I go through the web
Yeah.
browser because I don't
Yeah.
have it installed. And
Yep.
then on the weekends, and this also too is because am a part of a culture that wants people to have a good work-life balance.
Great. Yeah.
So it is very much encouraged that you shut things off, which I think is great because in the past I worked in more toxic cultures that
Yep.
think you're up on Saturday mornings just to answer them.
Yeah.
I, yeah, I had a CEO at one job who on Sunday I think intentionally did this to give us the scaries, would send like a bulleted email with about 99 things on it, but wouldn't say like who those things belong to. And there was just like a group of people on the email. And so people would just go into a tizzy and have hives and be behind the scenes the rest of that Sunday trying to figure out like who needed to do what. Meanwhile,
Ugh,
I'm sure he's probably enjoying the rest of his Sunday.
right. Oh my God. Well, I'm so glad you work in a more supportive culture now because,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, I think boundaries are you're right. They're 100% necessary.
Yeah.
And it still feels like a lot of people have just struggle a lot with like how
Yeah.
to create boundaries in a way that feels like kind, I guess.
Hmm.
And like
Hmm.
not so like how do you word it in a way that feels
Yeah.
and also I think some people struggle with the idea that like a boundary is not me controlling your behavior, it's me controlling my own behavior, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. All right, Alexis, such great tips. A lot of good information that I think is going to help people listening, watching out there. How can the audience connect with you and how can they work with you?
Thank you for asking. So, best place to find me is my website, which is alexishaselberger.com, which hopefully you'll put in the show notes because no one will
Yes.
be able to spell it. But that's a great place to get me. On Instagram, I'm at do.more.stress.less. And on all the other socials, I'm at do more stress less. And if folks want to work with me, I work with people. You can go to my website, sign up for a free consultation. I offer one-on-one coaching. I have a group coaching program that I run twice a year. I have online courses, and I also work with companies to do workshops and training and all sorts of things.
Awesome. And yes, we will drop all that in show notes so you don't have to try to figure out how to spell Hasselberger. Although I love your name. Okay, so now we're going to move into three things with Alexis. I just love this first question just because of this conversation today. How do you start? It's a two-parter. How do you start and end the day?
Okay, love this question. So I start the day with my most important work. So whatever the thing is that like is my must do for that day, like if this thing doesn't happen, like stuff's going down, then I do that thing first before checking any messages. Because what I learned from experience is that if I check messages first, even if I don't act on them,
Mhm.
now that's in my head, pulling my focus. It's so much easier to get the work done before I've checked email
Mhm.
because people don't really care whether you get back to them at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. Nobody's keeping track on that. But what I can get done in that hour is huge. So that's how I start the day or start the work day, rather. I am a person, as I mentioned, who like is not a morning person. So my alarm goes off like 30 minutes before my first meeting. And I'm like, brush my teeth, put on some clothes, get some tea at my desk. Like I really try to minimize that part of my day. Um,
Mhm.
and then my work day, to end my work day, I do a little bit of planning, just looking at my task list side by side with my calendar. Things always come up. So even if I've planned ahead for the week, there's
Mhm.
definitely going to be something that needs to move or change or be addressed. And so I just spend a little time making sure that tomorrow looks good, right? And that I'm coming in realistic. And then I spend the last several hours of my day doing things that I enjoy. So, I am also very much when I turn it off, even though I work for myself. And I spend a lot of time. I love cooking and reading, and I do pottery, and I do like a lot of knitting and crocheting. And so, like,
Nice.
that's how I end my day usually.
I like it. I like it. All right. Second question is what is a goal or intention you set for yourself this year?
So I always have a word of the year,
Yes,
or
me
maybe not for
too.
the last. Do you? Okay.
Yes.
So mine is amplify this year. And the reason that it's amplify is that my kind of overarching goal is to focus more on my group program
Mhm.
and my online courses and my kind of one-to-many offerings so
Mhm.
that I'm able to amplify, this kind of my message that sounds too haughty or something, but like, my message of really like you can do this stuff.
Mhm.
It is not that you're a disorganized person. It is like these
Right.
are skills you can learn and to amplify that message to reach more people.
Yes, I like that. All right. And last question. What's a book, a podcast, a show, or anything that's inspiring you at the moment?
Well, I recently, finally, after this had been on my list, my to read list for, several years, and I hadn't gotten around to it because my to read list has like hundreds of things on it. I finally read Trisha Hersey's book, Rest is Resistance. And I just think, what she's doing with the NAP ministry and really focusing on kind of reclaiming rest
Mhm.
as important in its own right is really inspiring to me.
Awesome. Love that. Well, thank you so much, Alexis. Like I said, this has been a great conversation. I love all the tips that you provided. I'm sure that the audience has gotten lots that they can use to help them be less distracted, less anxious about, being productive and meeting our goals. And so before I let you go, I would like for you to leave the audience with three takeaways from this conversation today.
Okay, great. So the first one I would say is like, there is nothing wrong with you if you feel overwhelmed, right? There's nothing wrong with you. That's the culture we live in, but there is something you can do about it. You are not sentenced to that fate, right? You can learn, of course I'm here, but there are many ways that you can learn about all of these things and put things into practice. The second thing really is like, write it down, get it out of your head, write it down. Doesn't matter where, try tick if you want, but write it down. And then the third one would be that, like, I shared my definition of productivity, but you get to share your definition of productivity, or you get to define productivity. Like, every person gets to define that for themselves. And I don't think we should let, capitalism and toxic work culture do that for us.
Awesome. Well, fantastic. Definitely going to check out Tick Tick just because it's called Tick Tick. And I have to see it now.
Well, my YouTube channel has a couple of videos I made about how to use it if you are interested.
All right. Well, I'll have to go check those out. Well, Alexis, thank you so much for coming to the show. You can always come back and share with us in the future. Best of luck this year, and best of luck with your word of the year, Amplify.
Thank you so much. It's been such a fun conversation. I really appreciate having me on.
Awesome. Well, stay tuned, everyone. I'll be right back.